This is my 29-gallon Medaka grout tank that was originally set up to give baby Medaka rice fish a safe place to grow without the risk of being eaten by their parents. The tank is now 8 months old, and as you can see, it's full of healthy juvenile Medaka that are ready to be moved to larger tanks. But with my adult Medaka and my other tanks constantly breeding, there's going to be more Medaka fry ready to move into this tank any day now. Other than removing excess duckweed and water lettuce every week, I've pretty much just left the plants to do what they would and grow out into a jungle-style aquascape as you see here. The idea was that the older, larger Medaka in here would be less likely to bother the smaller, younger ones and potentially eat the fry. I actually quite like the overgrown jungle-style aquascape tank, so the unkept appearance of this tank really doesn't bother me. So for today's video, I'm going to go over how I set this tank up, how it progressed through the cycle and move it right up to current day, and go over the future plans for the setup. I'm using one of my 29-gallon aquariums for this setup, and it has aquascape and dimensions similar to the Superfish Scaper range. By that, I mean it's not actually as long as a standard 29-gallon tank, but it is deeper front to back, giving more space for hardscape. As usual, I did add some cheap window privacy film to the back of the tank as I prefer the look of it like this, but it is optional. The main feature of the hardscape is a large piece of Kobo wood that has a ton of character, and it's going to be paired up with some Sirius stone to help weigh it down and prevent it floating. I was actually quite lucky because this wood does fit in the tank thanks to the deeper aquascape and dimensions, but I really don't think this would have fit into my other 29-gallon tank with standard dimensions. I got this Kobo wood from Horizon Aquatics, and as soon as I saw it I knew that I had to have it because it just looks so cool. Not only do I like the actual shape of it, but the offshoots give it that extra character, just adding to the detail potential for how you could use it in a tank. I did experiment with a few different layouts for the Sirius stone, but I did want to try a new carpeting plant in the tank, so I intentionally left a lot of open space in the foreground. So eventually I settled on a layout with 2 larger pieces of Sirius stone placed near the base of the driftwood to hold it down, and then I added another one for decoration towards the front right. I also made sure that the wood and stones had multiple contact points where I could apply glue to make sure that it could hold the wood in place. I used the regular aquarium glue and tissue method to bond everything together. You basically put pieces of tissue into the contact points and then add a little bit of glue that then reacts with the tissue to form a strong seal within minutes, and it usually cures very quickly. For the substrate, I chose fluval stratum because I knew from the start that I would be burying quite a lot of the hardscape into the substrate for this specific setup. Now you can bury hardscape in capped dirt setups, but in my opinion there's far more risk involved if you're doing it that way. Now you can see what I mean by burying the hardscape into the substrate in this clip in the top left, because the Kobo wood and the supporting Sirius stone is resting directly on the tank glass with the aquasoil packed in around it. And this is what the tank was looking like at this point of the build, and I was actually really pleased with how it was turning out. So with everything glued in place and the glue having time to dry and cure, it was time to fill the tank with water. I was a little nervous about the Kobo wood floating as I filled the tank with water because it is quite large, but thankfully the 2 Sirius stones were heavy enough to anchor it down. I'm also using a Haiger 957 to actually light the tank, and it's set to maximum intensity with a 6-hour photo period. Since this is a room temperature setup, there's no heater actually installed, but if I was running a heater for a tank this size, I would probably go with a Fluval T series. So moving on to actually cycling the tank, and for filtration I'm using an All Pond Solutions HOB 500 hang-on back canister filter. This really is a great option for this size of aquarium because it has plenty of room for different types of filter media, and it's also very budget friendly. In the first tray I added some filter floss for mechanical filtration, but for the remaining trays I packed it all out with 30 ppi foam for biological filtration. This media was carried over from the previous setup I had in this tank, so the biological media is already seeded with beneficial microorganisms, but the mechanical media did need swapping out to prevent clogging. Before starting the cycle, I added tap water conditioner to protect the microorganisms living in the biological media, and then I dosed the tank with Dr. Tim's ammonia solution to simulate a bioload and kickstart the cycle. I'm using the dark start cycling method for this aquarium, and I've got a dedicated video covering it in more detail which I link to in the description. At the time of setting this tank up, I already had 16 Medaka fry from a batch of eggs that I'd successfully hatched, but I also had several other batches in my tubs waiting to hatch, so I actually wasn't sure how many fry I'd be putting in here. That's why I basically wanted to set it to a 2 ppm ammonia dose to make sure it could handle their bioload. Fortunately, thanks to the established colonies of beneficial microorganisms already on this filter media, it cycled extremely quickly, and by that I mean it could process a dose of 2 ppm of Dr. Tim's ammonia down to 0 ppm ammonia and nitrite within 24 hours, which is a solid sign it was fully cycled. So moving on to planting the tank, and I'll leave a full plant list of the current plants in this video's description since I have made a few changes since the original setup. I wanted to try out some new plants just to see how they'd perform in my local water conditions, and to make planting easier I removed the water from the tank. First up was good old Amazon sword, which is very easy to keep in most tanks, and I planted this behind the Corbo catfish wood to create a dense area of leafy foliage for the fry to hide behind. Next up was Cryptocoryne Tropica, which is another very easy to grow plant that usually stays shorter than Amazon sword, but it does help to fill out the lower areas of the tank with its leaves. I prefer to use my crypts in front of hardscape as they blend the transition between the rocks and the substrate while adding different colours and textures. Some of the leaves may melt back after planting depending on the variety of crypt you're using and your water parameters, but they will usually regrow, and this is completely normal for this genus. Then I added some Echinodorus Tropica, which is a dwarf sword plant that I was testing out because this was around the time it was initially put into mass production. Because I wanted to closely monitor this, I put it in the back right corner away from the hardscape just so it was easier for me to see. But this has quickly become one of my favourite plants, especially for nano aquariums, and I have it in several other setups now, and in heated tanks it does very well. For the carpet, I went with Littorella Uniflora, and I picked up 3 tubs of this just to try and fill it out as best as possible from the start. One main advantage of this specific plant is that it's actually native to the United Kingdom, so in an unheated tank like this it should easily do well even during the cooler months. Next up was Trident Fern, which I wanted to use for extra cover for the fry, especially to reduce the risk of any juvenile larger Medaka in here snacking on the younger ones. I applied a small amount of aquarium safe glue to the roots, making sure to avoid the rhizome, and then tucked the fern under the Corbo catfish wood. I did have a few extra clumps left over, so I glued those directly above the main group to add more vertical layers of cover. I also had several varieties of Anubias and some regular Java fern left over in my quarantine tank from a different project that I decided to use in here. I glued the Java fern to the top of the Corbo wood to add a more thick elevated coverage across the back top of the tank. I think I had 5 small plantlets left over from the other tank, so I put them all in roughly the same place. Then came the Anubias Coffeefolia, which is one of my favourite plants in the aquarium hobby because of its deep green colour and its ribbed leaf texture, while it's also very easy to keep. With larger plants like this, I actually find it easier to apply the glue directly to the hardscape and then press the plant in place rather than gluing the roots themselves and trying to push it onto the hardscape that way. After that, I added Java Fern Latifolia, which is one of the largest Java Fern varieties in the hobby. This thing can get very big, so don't put it in any nano tanks, and I placed it to the back left of the Corbo wood to help bulk out the coverage there. I also had 3 Anubias Caladiifolia plants, and these are great for this type of tank because they have large wide leaves, but they don't grow too tall, making them perfect for creating hiding spots near the surface of the hardscape. I was starting to run out of space on the actual hardscape, so I had to get creative with these, and I only managed to get one onto the actual wood. For the remaining Caladiifolia, I attached some ceramic plant rings to their roots to add some weight, which makes it far easier to wedge these into gaps between the hardscape that isn't tightly fitting. I don't think this is essential, but in my experience it does make it far easier to put the plants exactly where you want them if your hardscape isn't tightly fitting together. Once I was confident that the glue had cured, I refilled the tank with tap water and added some conditioner along with a small dose of liquid fertilizer to help the plants get established, especially since there was no fish in here yet. Then, to finish things off, I added some water lettuce to the surface of the tanks, as the long roots from this plant are perfect for both hiding spots for baby Medaka, but they also serve as the perfect surface for the female Medaka to place their eggs on. A few days later, I decided that it was time to start stocking the tank, beginning with my tricolour Medaka. Now these were still fry, but they were getting close to the juvenile stage, and that's one of the main reasons I wanted to get them into an aquarium. At this stage, these little guys do look like platinum Medaka or maybe pearl Medaka, but over time they thankfully did start to colour up and take on that tricolour appearance. These little guys are very hardy fish, so it's not surprising that they quickly settled into their new home, and since Medaka are native to Japan, they are perfectly comfortable in unheated aquariums like this one, especially indoors in the UK. Then I added some pink ram's horn snails to help with algae control, and in hindsight I do think that this is a mistake, at least for how I prefer to keep my aquariums, which are shrimp focused. This is because ram's horns just breed so quickly, and they quickly have population booms that compete with the food for the shrimp, which can lead to a drop in the shrimp population over time. In comparison, neurite snails are a far better option for the type of tank I prefer, because their eggs don't hatch in fresh water, leaving a lot more biofilm and algae in the tank for the baby shrimp to survive. Unfortunately, due to a hard drive crash, I've lost the clips of me adding my orange Medaka fry and my pearl Medaka fry to the tank, as well as my Neocaridina cherry shrimp. So because of that hard drive crash, I'm just going to jump right ahead until present day, which is 8 months after the original setup of the tank, but in all honesty I'm actually really happy with how this tank's turned out. I did add some duckweed to the surface to help regulate water parameters and add an extra layer of safety, but in all honesty, this tank is heavily over-filtered due to the amount of media in the filter, so water parameters really aren't that much of a risk. Over the winter, the Amazon sword really didn't fare well in an unheated tank, so I ended up replacing it with some Ludwigia Palustris, which is another native plant to the UK. While it has grown well overall, it's started to have the same issue that the Ludwigia Mini Super Red has in my other tanks. In short, the lower parts of the stems tend to drop all of their leaves, and eventually the stem at this area will decay and the rest of the plant just breaks off and floats away. That's actually how this stem ended up at the front of the tank. It simply broke off and floated here, and then it kept growing, and I've just left it suspended in the water over time. It's difficult to see because of how overgrown the Ludwigia has become, but both the regular Java ferns and the Java fern Latifolia didn't handle the cold weather well, and they've mostly melted away. The Trident Fern also started to melt back, but I've left all of the rhizomes in the tank in place for all the Java fern varieties because I'm curious if they will show new growth during the warmer months. The Anubias, on the other hand, has been absolutely fantastic in this tank, even though it's a plant native to Africa, and it hasn't shown any issues with the colder water temperatures at all. The Cryptocoryne Tropica did struggle a little bit developing holes in its leaves, and I'm not sure if this is a colder temperatures, a potassium deficiency, or the army of pink ram's horn snails nibbling at its leaves, but it's still hanging on and I'm hoping it'll recover. The same thing happened with my Echinodorus Tropica, but I have seen some new growth on there recently, which is a good sign, and I gave one of the plants to my friends for his tank because he wanted some easy cheap plants. As you can see, the Littorella Uniflora has done incredibly well, far better than I actually thought it would, but like I said earlier, this plant is native to the United Kingdom, so it can survive outdoors here, never mind in a house. Since the spring kicked in and things started to get warmer a few weeks ago, it's been constantly sending out runners and quickly filling in the open areas of the tank. The water lettuce and duckweed have both been thriving, but the roots of the water lettuce have done a great job of growing in, so there's more hiding spots and laying areas for the Medaka. Speaking of the actual Medaka, they have all done really well, and the tricolour group have finally started to show some colours over the last few weeks, and I'm not sure if this is just because it's getting warmer, or they're just at that growth rate where the colour kicks in. The pink ram's horn snails have also done really well, and they were breeding constantly all through winter non-stop, and that's why there's such an army of them in here. Now there are some cherry shrimp and some Armano shrimp in here too, but it is very rare that I see them, and while I have seen some female cherry shrimp carrying eggs, I haven't really seen any babies, and I think it's because they are struggling for food because the ram's horn snail population eats absolutely everything. Finally, I want to briefly touch on the future of this tank. As you can see, some of these Medaka are large enough to be given away to friends to stock their summer tub and garden ponds, but I've got plenty of more fry on the way, judging by how much my adult Medaka in my other tanks are breeding right now. Because of that, I'm considering turning this tank into a dedicated breeding setup for different strains of Medaka rice fish. The goal would be to try and diversify the genetics and hopefully produce some really colourful but really hardy fish. In my experience, Medaka are significantly hardier than guppies, but I did recently lose one of my yellow guppies for no apparent reason, and I just don't want this to be happening to my Medaka as well due to line breeding them over and over again. So at least until the end of this year, I'm planning on using this tank to mix and breed different varieties of Medaka just to see what happens. The overgrown jungle aquascape should be ideal for this, as it provides plenty of surfaces for the females to lay their eggs, and there's lots of hiding spots for any fry that hatch to avoid being eaten as well. Anyway guys, that brings the video to an end. Thanks for watching, have a good day, and good luck with your own planted grow tanks if you decide to give something like this a go.